Hello and welcome to this R tutorial. So now that we fitted our logistic regression to the training set, we are going to predict the test set results using this classifier that we just built in the previous tutorial. So usually we can do this in one step, but for logistic regression we're going to do it in two steps, and we are more interested in having the 0 and 1 predictions rather than the probabilities. So first let's take anyway the probabilities. So we're going to call them prob_pred, which is the vector of the which will be the vector of the predicted probabilities of our test set observations by the classifier. So prob_pred equals predict. So we're going to use this predict function to predict the probabilities based on our GLM classifier. And speaking of classifier, this is our first argument in the predict function. So here we input classifier, comma. Then the next argument is type. And for logistic regression, we should choose the response type, because that will give us the probabilities listed in a single vector. So that's what we want. And then we have to specify the new observations that we want to predict. So in our case, these new observations are the test set observations. So new data equals test set. And we're just going to remove the last column of the test set because the last column is the dependent variable and that's what we want to predict. So we will only take test set minus 3, that is the two independent variables, age and salary of the test set. Alright, so let's just summarize this line. We are predicting the test set observations using our classifier, which is the logistic regression classifier. Alright, but that returns the probabilities because, as you can see, if I select this line and execute, here if I type prob_pred in the console, I will get, as you can see, I will get the probabilities of each of my test set observations. So here, for example, let's go to our test set. The first observation has index 2. The real result is 0. That means that the user number 2 didn't buy the SUV. And now if we go back to logistic regression, we can see that for this user number 2, prob_pred returned 0.016. So what is this probability exactly? This probability is the probability that the dependent variable is equal to 1. That is the probability that the user buys the SUV. So here, since it's very small, it's 0.016. That means that the classifier predicts a very low probability of the dependent variable being equal to 1. That means that it predicts that the user number 2 has very low chance to buy the SUV. Therefore, in short, prob_pred returns the predicted probabilities that the user will buy the SUV. But we don't really want that. We would rather have the 0 and 1 results. And to do this, it's very simple. We're just going to do some kind of a conversion. So we're going to create our vector of predicted results that we're going to call ypred equals. And then we're just going to use if-else to transform those probabilities into 0 and 1 results. So here I'm going to write if-else. So the first argument of if-else is the condition. And the condition is going to be prob_pred over 0.5. Because if prob_pred is larger than 0.5, that means that the user has more chance to buy the SUV. So in that case, that means that we want to predict 1. And actually the second argument of the if-else function is the result you want to take when this condition is true. So here we're going to put a 1. Alright? And the last argument is the result you want to return if this condition is false. And if this condition is false, that means that the predicted probability is lower than 0.5. That means that the user has less chance to buy the SUV, and therefore it's going to be a 0. And that's it. Now you're going to see if I select this line and execute, all right, let's look at wipe red now. Wipe red. As you can see, I only have zeros or 1. I no longer have the probabilities. And remember, the real result for user 2 was 0, so that's what happened in reality. And here our classifier predicted 0, so that's a correct prediction, and that's because, remember before, the probability was very low, so it was below 0.5, and therefore it returned 0. Alright, so we predicted our test set results. That's a good thing. Now we are going to evaluate these predictions thanks to the confusion matrix that we're going to build in the next tutorial. So I look forward to seeing you there, and until then, enjoy